Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you today this presentation. It is based on the research paper 5 Energy Generations of Tall Building, a historical analysis of energy consumption in high-rise building, 2008, and a post-research note by Professor Philip Oldfield in 2018. The research paper was introduced in a conference by the Council on Tall Building and Urban Habitat. Both the paper and the note are published in the book on the right, available from Amazon.com. Lessons from history can stop us from making the same mistake. As we move on to reduce the carbon emissions from the existing buildings, we might need to understand how they were made. Building design is always affected by 4 major factors: regulatory changes, developments in technology and materials, change in architectural thinking, economic issues. These also affect how energy is used. The New York zoning law, the 1970s energy crisis, all have effect on building designs until we have another imminent climate disaster. In the late 19th century, we saw tall building originated in the US. During the early era, these buildings used very little operating energy, primarily for heating and ventilation. The artificial lighting level was very low, at 22 to 43 lux until 1913. They were having high ceilings and large windows for commanding rentability. An example of this building is the Home Insurance Building in Chicago, completed 1885. For the first generation building, they usually have 20 to 40% glazed area, lack of thermal insulation on the facade, mainly due to use of single glazing. They have poor air tightness. Though thermal mass on the rest of the facade is high, help to maintain warmth during winter. The first generation buildings were mainly constructed prior to the 1916 zoning law. They are bulky in compact forms with repeated floor plates. They are having high volume to envelope ratio, allowing the retainment of heat in winter. They have shallow least span for greater emittance of natural lighting. Another example of this is the Equitable Building of New York, with limestone cladding backed by back masonry with punctured windows. And then comes to the second generation, which were mainly affected by the zoning law introduced in 1916 until 1951. The law allowed more lights to reach street level. This led to less bulky building, meaning the buildings are slimmer, with increased envelope surface area per unit volume, this resulting in higher heating requirements. This is the comparison chart. In the pre-zoning law era, buildings are bulky with less surface area in proportion, while those built afterwards have higher surface area per volume ratio, resulting in higher heating and air conditioning energy use. The second generation building have smaller floor plans. The glazing area remains similar, lead to better natural lighting. New York City required higher lux level at that time. The requirement was increased from a lower values to reach above 120 lux. And the power company advocates a much higher lux level still, reaching 300 lux, to encourage the use of more power for artificial lighting. During the second generation era, we saw buildings suffered increased primary energy needs through a change in shape, higher artificial lighting requirements, and a past shift to mechanical ventilation. Use of high thermal mass for some material remain unchanged. Similar zoning law introduced in other American cities. We also saw the first central air-conditioned building built in 1928, which is the Milan Building in San Antonio, Texas. In the post-war era, between 1951 to 1973 energy crisis, This is the third generation. Buildings built during this time have significantly higher glazing ratio, typically between 50 to 75%. An example is the Lever House of New York, built in 1952, which has a single glazed curtain wall. The curtain wall also has low spandrel panels with fire upstand for prevention of fire spread. The U value is at 3.3 watt per meter square K, which is higher than the Empire State Building built in 1932, which having a U value of 2.6 watt per meter square K. Another example is the Lakeshore Drive Apartments, which has an even higher U value of 4.2 watt per meter square K. The third generation buildings suffer from vast heat loss in winter and overheat in summer. It is compensated for by air conditioning, led to excessively high primary energy consumption. It is also interesting to note that most of the buildings are built in black color. Examples are Seagram Building, Toronto Dominion Bank Tower, IBM Building, and the Shinjuku Mitsui Building. Many black buildings also use dark color glass tinted with bronze. It's bad for the primary energy use. Dark glazing also means less use of natural light. These buildings are predominantly like a large rectilinear box with deep office floor plans. They are no longer slender. This form resembles first-generation buildings with a degree of bulkiness and compactness. The surface area to volume ratio is between 0.085 to 0.13 meter square per meter cube, very similar to first-generation buildings. The new zoning law was introduced in 1961. Under the new zoning law, the wide setback was replaced by restriction on floor area ratios. Building users prefer deeper floor designs. This allows reduction of heat loss in winter through the low-performance curtain wall, but limiting the penetration of natural lighting into the office. Use of lightweight curtain wall make high-rises become hermetically sealed glass boxes, which resembles a greenhouse. What's more, the 1960 recommended practice for office lighting recommended illuminance level between 1076 to 1615 lux, which is much higher than today's recommendation of 500 lux. Overall, more reliance on air conditioning and fluorescent lighting. Buildings completed in late 1960s have primary energy use double compared with those constructed in early 1950s in less than 20 years. Then the fourth generation came. The extravagance of energy wasted by single curtain wall was stopped by the energy crisis between 1973 and 1979. Change to double glazing was a code requirement and became popular. Glass used also changed to solar control ones, while colored or mirror glazing made their ways to be replaced by clearer glass for daylight transmittance. Here we can see in Paris, the Tour Eiffel, originally proposed as the twin towers to the neighboring Tour Eiffel, was completely redesigned due to the energy crisis. In the fourth generation buildings, we see a much lower U value, thanks to double glazing, low E coatings, and argon filter cavities. The U value dropped from 3 to 4.2 watt per meter square K down to 1 to 1.5 watt per meter square K. Lighting level recommended were 25 to 50% decreased along with the use of clearer glass. We also see a widespread use of data processing equipment. An average of 17.5 watt per meter square heat gain from computers to be added to the loading of mechanical cooling in summer. When we talk about the fifth energy generation, it is important to note that majority of tall buildings constructed today continue to demonstrate fourth generation characteristics, meeting regulatory energy performance, but not be better by a significant amount. Yet, Many buildings are voluntarily built to high energy performance standards, including a few built in early years. Examples are Commerzbank in Frankfurt, Germany, National Commercial Bank in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and Price Tower in Oklahoma. This is the National Commercial Bank in Saudi Arabia. Using Commerzbank as an example, it has a full building height central atrium, providing natural lighting and ventilation. It used large open sky gardens to further increase daylight penetration and to provide a place for social interaction and leisure at high levels. It has a double-skin facade that allows for natural ventilation for 80% of the year while operable windows. It also has a water-based cooling system using chilled ceiling. This illustrates the Commerzbank central atrium and sky garden. This drawing illustrates the ventilated facade at Commerzbank. In general, the fifth energy generation building exhibits a higher surface area to volume ratio, between 0.1 to 0.22 meters square per meter cube, compared to 0.09 of the fourth generation, achieved by shallow floor plan or large atria. It also has a higher level of glazing, between 40 to 85%. It uses natural lighting with mixed mode ventilation. In some cases, the buildings include on-site energy generation from low to zero carbon sources. This building in Berlin has shallow floor plan. The facade is openable to facilitate natural ventilation. Professor Oldfield made the following comments 10 years after the research paper was published. There is slow shift from fourth to fifth generation design. According to Green Building Trends 2016 report, 40% of clients now expecting a green building, up from 34% in 2008. This proportion is still lower than what we expected. Regulatory means have incrementally tightening across the last 4 decades, moving towards the goal of establishing widespread net zero energy building. Professor Oldfield also noted that not much incentive for developers to build net zero energy buildings. Also, in the next 20 years, 2/3 of the buildings built will not need to comply with any building energy code. There are positive moves. In the EU, net zero energy buildings becomes mandatory, while in some jurisdictions, such as San Francisco City, LEED Platinum buildings will be given priority in the approval process. It is not enough to only focus on operating energy, reducing artificial and air conditioning loads. There is increasing demand in the building industry to reduce embodied carbon emissions in the construction product and process. Example is the use of timber in lieu of concrete and steel. To meet with the Paris Climate Agreement, there is urgent need to adopt stringent energy codes and put further incentive as well as knowledge sharing for fifth generation designs. There is an urgent need to improve the current stock of first, second, third, and fourth generation skyscrapers. Before the end of this presentation, I wish to share a video from YouTube made by the Time magazine, which gives an account on the energy retrofit of the Empire State Building in New York. This building belongs to the second energy generation. Thank you.
Many of the tallest buildings in the world are iconic and symbolic for both the cities and the countries where they're being built. The energy of the Roaring '20s is manifested in the Empire State Building, a representation of not just the city of New York, but the whole country as a whole.
Buildings are responsible for about 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions in New York State. And we have millions of old buildings. Retrofitting existing buildings is probably one of our most formidable climate challenges.
The icons of urban life are at the center of policies to slow climate change. In 2019, New York City enacted Local Law 97, which places carbon caps on most large buildings. Within years, the city will fine buildings for exceeding those caps. And at the state level, lawmakers are hoping to make New York a leader in large-scale retrofitting. The 90-year-old Empire State Building provides a template for environmentally conscious renovations.
That's the one that people are looking at, and what did they do, and how are they measuring themselves against that building?
In 2010, the Empire State Building completed the first phase of an extensive retrofit. Within a decade, the retrofit slashed the building's energy usage by more than 40%, and it saved the high-rise more than $4 million each year.
We moved to a program to reposition the building in a dynamic way as a leader in energy efficiency, building health, and indoor environmental quality as a way to differentiate to attract better tenants, better credits, longer lease terms. There's no silver bullet, it's silver buckshot. It's lots of different pieces that work together.
We've done a tremendous amount of work with our tenants to do things like lower the energy usage associated with lighting, equipment, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. One of the things that we did was to retrofit all of the windows in the building. We have 6,514 windows. We reused over 96% of the existing materials. We added a pane of suspended coated film, which manages heat gain in the summer and heat loss in the winter. We added insulation behind all of our radiators. We upgraded the entire central plant, which is a chiller plant. It provides all the cooling. We reused the shells of these giant machines, and we gutted them and rebuilt them on site.
We decided to replace our elevators with the destination dispatch type of system, which actually uses regenerative braking instead of just friction braking that generates heat. It generates electricity.
There is no shortcut. You have to look at all the systems in a building, and you have to look at the behavior of the human beings that occupy that building. These are lessons that we've learned that not everyone knows yet. And these are, we intend to inform policy with our successful practice and also help other building owners to get to the point where we are and hopefully to get to the point where we will be.
What the Empire State Building did a decade ago was pioneering and really led a green building movement. And this needs to continue, and we actually need to even go further and deeper. We think about all the buildings we need to retrofit, the big ones and the small ones. We need to be retrofitting 200 buildings a day, every day for the next 12,000 days. The magnitude of the transformation that we need in our economy really does require action at every level of government. Our goals in the state are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 40% by 2030 and 85% by mid-century. The Empire Building Challenge is a first-of-a-kind public-private partnership to make New York a global hub for low-carbon and environmentally sustainable building solutions. We selected 10 partners who we will work through in this public-private partnership to demonstrate low-carbon technologies, low-carbon solutions in high-rise buildings. Through these early demonstrations, we will start to learn more about how a building owner can decarbonize a high-rise building. We will only be successful if we actually show that those low-carbon solutions, whether it's low-carbon buildings or a carbon-free power grid, that is a better system for people, that's better, that creates economic opportunity, and it's a better system that other entities want to replicate, whether it's throughout the country, whether it's throughout the globe. But that's the transformation that we need.